Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. On today's video, I'm going to be taking you over my whole entire guitar chain, including the EQ that I showed you guys last video, because a lot of you were asking me to break it down and show you step by step on how I arrived at the tone that I got in that video. So let's go ahead and get to it. All right, so this is what we're working with. These guitars were reamped by my friend Phil. He reamped them through his driftwood. So I have an SM57 on the right and left channels and a KM184 on the right and left channels as well. And they're all blended together. And this is what it sounds like solo with none of the processing on. So we're working with a real amplifier here, no VST, no amp sim, none of that sort of stuff. So we have to make it sound polished and we have to make it sound tight for this style of music because this is how it sounds like without any processing. And here's how I went about doing that and making it fit within the context of the mix. The first plugin we have is Pro MB, and what this is going to be doing is this is going to be making the low end tight, especially on the palm mutes and the chuggy sections. So let's go ahead and dial this in and I'll show you exactly what I mean. About right there. Make the attack and release super fast. And let's hear before and after on those chugs. Let's adjust the threshold. So as you can see, my multi-band compressor is only activating whenever the guitar player chugs or hits something super low, just to keep the low end more tight and in check, especially whenever you're playing it in the context of a mix and you have guitars fighting for so much space with kick drum and bass and all of that sort of good stuff. You just want to make sure that your guitar is very tight and controlled whenever the song is fast paced like this. Also, I highly recommend listening to this on headphones or on good monitors so you can hear exactly what I'm doing whenever it's detailed like that. So the next thing we got is one of my favorite guitar strip plugins. This is made by my homie Dan Corniff. This is called the Amplified Instrument Processor, and pretty much it has all of these EQs, it has a VCA compressor, it has an insufferable mid-range filter, which if you've seen some of my other videos, you know that this is extremely helpful on getting some of that 3 to 4K ringing that you find in distorted guitars, along with, in the back of this, you can add some tube saturation and everything. So let's see how this sounds like before and after as well. And I will say, out of all the plugins on my guitar bus, this one probably makes the biggest difference. So let's hear it. Okay, so the only thing I'm doing with this plugin is the guitars are spread out just an extra 10%. Whenever I go over to the insufferable mid-range filter here, you can listen to what I'm doing if I click the listen button. I hate that noise. So I got rid of that by about 4 to 5 dB, and I put the octave range at 2, so it's grabbing the upper octave of that note as well. And then the only thing else I did was I turned on the signal processor, which activates this in the back, and I have that at 60%. 100%, it kind of felt like it was taking the realness of the amps away from me. So I wanted to dial that back and kind of introduce more of that tone that you get from a real amp and a real cab that you usually wouldn't find in an amp sim. So moving on to the next thing is one of my favorite Waves plugins. It's a Shep's Parallel Particles. And this is just a 4-band processor, EQ, compression. It does some stuff. I don't really know exactly what it does. I'm just turning knobs and using my ear here, if I'm being completely honest with you guys. And this is what this sounds like before and after. But pretty much what I am doing and how I dialed this in was I unlinked the input and the output, because the more I drove these knobs, the higher it got in volume. I didn't want that. So I was able to compensate for that by ear by turning the output down. The thick knob just kind of does a low mid thing that I really like. The bite knob, I think, is more around your 2.5K, just to give the guitars a little bit of life and brighten them up a little bit. That's all that plugin is doing. And let's go ahead and see how we're sounding like in the mix so far, so we can make sure that the moves that we're making are the right ones. So far, so good. Let's keep moving on. The next plugin I have is Pro Q3. And all this is doing is I'm on mid mode over here, and I'm just boosting the mids of the guitar. I am very much in the opinion that the mid range of the guitar is one of the most important areas. I think people tend to scoop that in metal too much because it does sound more aggressive by itself. But then whenever you start putting it in a mix, your note definition and clarity starts to fall apart, and it kind of ruins some things for me personally. So I like pumping a little bit more mids into my guitar. And the next EQ I have after that is what I did in the last video. And if you missed that, you can check it out here. All it is just some high pass, low pass stuff, dipping cab resonance, and a little bit of 6K up there. And the final thing I have is the L1 limiter. All this is doing is pinning the guitars down, and then I'm using the ceiling to kind of bring some volume back and just match that with the levels in the mix. So let's hear how all of this sounds before and after solo, as well as in the mix. So just to go over everything real quick one more time, I know this looks like one of those videos where someone's trying to show you 20 plugins to get a good sound, but whenever you break it down, it's really just a multi-band compressor to control the lows, another guitar strip style plugin to help with those resonant frequencies and give it a little bit of saturation, and pretty much just some EQ and volume after that. I mean, whenever you look at the Shep's plugin I used, it's really just introducing some more EQ. And I technically could have put that mid EQ that I had in my first instance of Pro Q3 in the second one and just used one plugin for all of that. And then just the limiter. I mean, it's really simple, super easy. The only thing else I did for my individual guitars is I was just cutting some more like fizzy high end that gets introduced whenever you're amping up real guitars. And here's what that sounded like real quick. So I'm just cutting some of that nasty fizzy stuff because I really don't want to hear any of that, especially since I'm boosting some high end on my guitar bus. Another thing you guys have asked me about in the comments is how to compress guitars. With super heavily distorted guitars like this, I don't really use compression unless it's the multiband low end technique I showed off at the start of this video, or if the Sheps plugin is introducing any sort of its own compression. That's all I really do. If you already look at the waveform of these amped up guitars, are already pretty sausage like, and I wanted to retain as many dynamics as I possibly could, and that's typically how I would approach rock and metal regardless anyway. And if you get clean guitars, lead guitars, that's whenever I start playing with compression on them, and maybe we'll talk about that in a future video. So that's it for this week's video. If you found this useful, please like and subscribe to the channel, and let me know what future content you would like to see from us in the comments below.